Okay, welcome back. I guess you were so excited that you go, oh, yes, this calcium stuff. I know this calcium stuff. I remember it already. Let's move on to the next one. Well, I want you to pause your video and I want you to go back and practice your negative feedback loop. Do it both for the hormone that occurs when blood levels of calcium are high and do it again when blood levels of calcium are low. And only then continue on. Okay. Let's move on to the good stuff. Let's talk about the pituitary gland. So another name for pituitary gland is hypophysis, which I think means the growth below. So it was like this little thing dangling beneath the brain. So it seemed like an appropriate name at the time. And I don't know why most of us call it the pituitary gland, but in order to understand parts of the endocrine system, it's easier to go back to its original name, the hypophysis, okay? And if you recall, it sits right below the hypothalamus, which is going to be important in just another slide. So looking at the pituitary gland hanging below the hypothalamus, what you can notice is it is divided in separate lobes. We have an anterior lobe, we've got this really skinny middle part, and then we have a posterior lobe. So we're going to be talking about what hormones come out of the anterior lobe of the pituitary gland and what hormones come out of the posterior lobe of the pituitary gland. So in order to orient yourself on this type of picture, what you want to do is go back up to the hypothalamus and find the optic chiasm, which is this structure here. So remember, eyeball is here, optic nerve goes to the optic chiasm. So that is the anterior side of the pituitary gland, because most of the time you're not going to have a cerebellum back there to tell you that's posterior. But let's start with the posterior lobe of the pituitary gland, and it is called the neurohypophysis because it's neurosecretory. In other words, do you see that word neuron is there? Because neurons are only involved in the posterior lobe of the pituitary gland. So here's the interesting thing. The posterior lobe of the pituitary gland, the neurohypophysis, this is not where the hormones released from here are actually made. There are neurons with their axon terminals in the neurohypophysis, and then their axons are in the stalk, and the cell body is way up there in the hypothalamus. So it's way up there in the hypothalamus that the hormones actually made and packaged in vesicles, and then that travels through the stalk, and the hormone actually sits in the neurohypophysis. So we say it comes from the neurohypophysis. We don't say it comes from the hypothalamus. Okay? Once it's released from the neuron based on the stimulus, it's going to enter venous blood channels exiting the neurohypophysis, and from these veins it'll travel back to the heart and then be distributed elsewhere, everywhere in your body that it needs to go to. Now there's only two hormones made here in the neurohypophysis, antidiuretic hormone and oxytocin. So let's talk about them one by one. So in order to understand antidiuretic hormone, which is also known as vasopressin, and after you've written it a couple of times, you can abbreviate it ADH, but not on a test unless you've written out antidiuretic hormone. You need to understand, if you're antidiuretic, what does diuretic mean? Well, a diuretic is something that causes diuresis, which is a definition which didn't help you at all, right? So diuresis means you have increased urine output. So antidiuretic hormones then mean we're not going to have increased urine output. We're going to have the opposite, so urine output is going to go down. So let me show you how this happens. The stimulus for this class, and there's other stimuli that you can get into more advanced physiological classes, but the stimulus for us for antidiuretic hormone is going to be a high blood sodium concentration. When this occurs, cells in the hypothalamus realize, whoa, person was on a pretzel or chips or pizza or whatever was salty thing last night. We've got way too much sodium floating around in the blood, and so the message goes down to the neurohypophysis, which releases antidiuretic hormone in the blood. In the venous system, gets carried to the heart, and then has to travel all the way to the kidneys through endocrine system, long distance. in the kidneys. It's going to act on parts of the kidneys, which you will learn about when you learn the physiology of the renal system. The net result is the water that was going to be in your urine now exits and goes back into the tissues to go back into the bloodstream, so that the amount of urine being secreted goes down. You have a lower volume of urine, and because it has less water, it's more concentrated, it's darker, it's yellow, it's a little bit more odoriferous. Yes. And the net result is all that extra water now is dumped back into your bloodstream, so that your blood sodium concentration becomes dilute and you stay in that lovely homeostasis at a lower level. So that's it for antidiuretic hormones. So go ahead and practice this negative feedback loop. And I actually put a little graph right on this slide so that you don't have to flip back and forth between various slides. So you need to do more than just fill in the 4 blanks. You need to actually write out the whole thing, because you need to know this entire statement. And the only way you're going to learn it is by saying it over and over and over again. All right, that's it for antidiuretic hormone. Once you're done, as I said, there were 2 hormones in, what's this part of the pituitary gland? Yeah, I know you want to say posterior, but what's the other name for it? The neurohypophysis. And the other hormone in the neurohypophysis is oxytocin. So as you recall, when I was talking about positive feedback, I was talking about oxytocin. So we have this beautiful, healthy baby being born. So here's an interesting thing I get almost every semester from students when I tell you before the test, go through and write out all your negative feedback loops. I always get students in there going, you know, I'm really stuck doing the negative feedback loop for oxytocin, to which I go, do you recall that oxytocin was positive feedback? And they go, yeah. And I go, so why are you trying to do a negative feedback loop for something that's positive feedback? Okay, yeah, no, a red light is not a green light. So you can't have a negative feedback loop for positive feedback, so don't bother trying to do it. Now, in addition to causing uterine contraction, giving us a beautiful bouncing baby boy or girl, or oxytocin has a couple of other effects. A significant effect is in the breast. So in the breast after delivery, the female breast is making a bunch of milk for the baby to consume for its nutritional needs. And where the breast is being stored in, where the milk is being stored in the breast, that area is surrounded by little smooth muscle cells that the oxytocin will act on. So when the baby suckles at the mother's breast, that causes secretion of oxytocin, which then causes this smooth muscle to contract, which is the milk letdown reflex. So the milk is ejected from the breast. Now notice, this is not milk production. Milk production is going to be a different hormone, which we will learn about much later on. Oxytocin is the milk letdown or milk ejection hormone. So those are the 2 big things for oxytocin. There is a third one, but don't tell me about the third one if I ask you for physiological examples of what happens with oxytocin. But we do know that oxytocin is what helps promote maternal fetal bonding. So this is why it's super important to have skin-to-skin contact with the baby and the mom as soon as possible after the birth. With that, we are done with the neurohypophysis, and we will come back to learn about the anterior lobe of the pituitary gland and its hormones. So thank you for sticking with it. Make sure you really understand the neurohypophysis before you move on to the next video.